I had just taken my first sip of coffee when my phone buzzed with that kind of urgency that makes your stomach twist. It was my manager, something about a client emergency and needing someone on a plane within hours. And of course, I said yes. That's what I do. I fix things. I show up. I carry the weight so no one else has to. I tossed a few work outfits into my bag, heart racing but steady, already planning my approach before even leaving the house. Mark was sprawled across the couch when I told him. He barely sat up, just blinked a few times and mumbled something about me being amazing. "Go save the world," he said, forcing a lazy grin. I leaned in, kissed his cheek. His skin was warm, but something about the way he looked at me felt distant. I almost asked if everything was okay, but I didn't. I figured he was tired. We'd been distant lately, sure, but I thought it was just life getting in the way. So I grabbed my bag and left. The airport was loud and buzzing, but weirdly, it brought me a bit of peace. I found a seat near the gate, opened my laptop, and tried to shift into work mode. That's when my phone lit up again. It was Mrs. Halverson, our elderly neighbor who always waved when I pulled into the driveway. "Hi, dear. Could you please ask your husband to turn the music down? The party is getting a bit out of hand." My stomach dropped. My first thought was, what party? And then just like that, something in me clicked. I didn't think. I didn't wait. I booked a car back home. The car ride home felt endless. Every red light stretched like a cruel joke. Every slow driver ahead of us felt personal. My mind wouldn't shut off. I kept thinking maybe it was nothing, maybe a misunderstanding, a neighbor mixing up addresses, or a surprise he hadn't mentioned. But that sinking feeling in my gut? It wasn't new. It had been whispering to me for months. The way he'd been pulling away, the distracted looks, the way he laughed more with strangers on his phone than with me over dinner. I stared out the window, barely blinking, my heart thudding like it knew what I didn't want to admit. I'd spent years building something steady with him, something real, something safe. I held us together when work got hard, when the spark faded, when life turned us into distant roommates. I believed love was showing up even when things weren't easy. But now, that belief felt like a thread unraveling, and I couldn't stop pulling at it, even as I wished with everything in me that I was wrong. The driver asked if I was okay when I clenched the seatbelt so tightly my knuckles went white. I just nodded. What was I supposed to say? I think my husband threw a party the second I left for the airport. It sounded ridiculous. It felt surreal. I hadn't even been gone 2 hours. But my hands were shaking. Something was happening. Something I wasn't meant to see. And yet, something told me I needed to see it. I needed to catch it before it vanished behind lies and empty apologies. As we turned onto my street, I could already hear it, the bass thudding through the pavement, laughter spilling out into the night air like it belonged to someone else's life. There were cars everywhere, parked along the curb, half on lawns, headlights still warm. My heart was racing, but my face stayed still. I don't know how I kept my composure. Maybe part of me had already broken on the ride home. Or maybe I'd trained myself too well to stay calm when the ground beneath me was crumbling. The porch light was on. That same warm glow I used to associate with comfort. Now it just felt like a spotlight, waiting to expose whatever was on the other side of the door. I didn't even knock. I had keys. It was my house. At least I thought it was. The moment I stepped inside, it was like I'd walked into a different universe. Loud music, perfume in the air, people I'd never seen lounging on my furniture, laughing like they belonged there, like I didn't. I stood there, invisible in my own home. No one noticed me. Not at first. I could have screamed, but I didn't. I just watched. And with every second, the quiet inside me grew louder. I hadn't even made it past the hallway, but I already knew. Something had shifted. Permanently. And I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do. But I knew one thing with chilling certainty. I hadn't come home early just to disappear. I stepped further inside, and the sound hit me like a wave. Laughter, clinking glasses, loud music echoing off the walls I once painted myself. Every inch of the house felt foreign, like someone had stolen the skeleton of my life and dressed it up in chaos. There were women everywhere. Tight dresses, high heels, red lipstick smudged across cocktail glasses. Strangers, giggling in corners, snapping selfies against the backdrop of my living room, the same one where I once hung Christmas stockings. No one turned to look at me. I wasn't even a blip on their radar. One woman brushed past me on her way to the kitchen, not even offering a glance. I saw open bottles of wine on the counter, sticky liquor spills on the floor, and the vase Mark gave me for our 5th anniversary now filled with plastic straws. I stood in the center of it all, completely still. It was like walking into someone else's life, except it was mine. And he had opened the door wide, letting the world walk all over it. I moved slowly, trying to make sense of it. Not screaming, not crying, just watching, observing, collecting. My heels clicked against the tile like a metronome to the numbness setting in. And still, not a single person seemed to care that I was there. I passed by my own wedding photo, shoved face down on a side table, like even the house itself was trying to forget I ever existed in it. But I remembered. Every wall, every memory. And still, I kept walking. I followed the sound of louder music toward the backyard, and that's when I saw him. Mark, shirtless, grinning, holding a drink like he hadn't a care in the world. He was seated like a king, sprawled in one of the patio chairs, surrounded by 3 women who looked like they belonged on the cover of a cheap magazine. One had her hand on his shoulder. Another was feeding him something off a toothpick. The third? She was on his lap, her head tilted back in laughter, like they shared some secret joke. Time didn't stop. It didn't even slow. But everything inside me did. I didn't yell. I didn't gasp. I just stood there, watching the man I married laugh like a teenager on spring break, completely at home in the wreckage he created. And in that moment, I felt something shift. Not a crack, not a break. A clean snap. Like a cord being cut. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was something colder, something quieter, something far more dangerous. Eventually, he saw me. Our eyes locked, and that smirk on his face drained into confusion, then panic. He froze, mid-sip. The woman in his lap turned to see what he was staring at. But I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I let him sit there, unraveling under the weight of my silence. I turned around, walked past the mess, past the strangers, past the music, and stepped out of the house like it never belonged to me at all. I didn't rush to the car. I didn't break down. I walked. Slow, deliberate, one foot in front of the other. My heels sank slightly into the grass as I moved past the line of cars cluttering the curb. I didn't even look back. Not once. Because I knew if I did, I might lose that strange, steady calm holding me together. And I needed that calm more than I needed answers. More than I needed apologies. I wasn't ready to scream. I was ready to think. Inside the car, I sat in silence for a long time. The engine was off, windows slightly cracked. I could still hear the thump of the music, feel the bass in my chest like it was mocking me. But in that stillness, I made a quiet promise to myself. He wouldn't get a second chance to explain this away. Not with a stuttered excuse, not with drunken nonsense, not with flowers and fake tears. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. And now, I had one to make too. I didn't drive off right away. I just let the reality settle over me like a second skin. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. It was real. And it had unfolded right in front of my eyes. And while he was still inside playing the part of some bachelor, I was already writing the next scene. One where I didn't fall apart. One where I didn't beg. One where I took back the pen and rewrote the ending myself. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw things or call my best friend in the middle of the night. Instead, I went quiet. That dangerous kind of quiet that comes when a woman has seen enough. The kind of quiet that listens, plans, calculates. The next morning, while he was probably nursing a hangover and pretending nothing had happened, I was already sitting in a lawyer's office. I told her everything, every detail, and she didn't flinch, just nodded, handed me a pen, and got to work. When I got home, I didn't confront him. He wasn't even there. That helped. I went straight to the security system he had forgotten even existed. The tiny cameras we installed years ago after a neighbor's car got broken into. He'd barely touched the app since, but I had. I downloaded the footage from the night of the party. Every frame, every sound, the women, the drinking, the way he laughed about me being too busy playing boss. It was all there, waiting for me like cold evidence on a silver platter. I didn't even feel angry watching it. Not anymore. What I felt was clarity, for the first time in years maybe. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to plead. I was going to be methodical. Not for revenge, not yet, but for self-respect. I froze the joint accounts. All of them. He never noticed I was the one depositing most of the money anyway. I called the bank, updated my passwords, reset everything he could ever try to weasel his way back into. I was done playing supportive. By the third day, I changed the locks. He was still gone, probably staying with a friend, or more likely with one of those women who thought his cheap charm was something rare. I didn't care where he was. I only cared that when he returned, he'd know without a word that the door he used to walk through without question no longer recognized him. I watched from the upstairs window as the locksmith worked, the metal clicking into place like punctuation on the sentence I'd waited years to write. Then I packed his things. Not carefully, not cruelly, just deliberately. Every shirt he left draped over the armchair, every cologne bottle he used before a night out, with the guys. Trash bags, not boxes, not luggage. Because when someone treats your life like it's disposable, you learn to stop wrapping their mess in niceties. I left them out front, right by the walkway, and then I taped the envelope to the door. Inside, a legal notice, divorce papers, and a copy of the footage. Neatly labeled, no explanation needed. It started raining shortly after. I don't know why that part sticks with me, but it does. I watched the trash bags get wet from the window, the fabric inside soaking through, colors darkening. But I didn't feel bad. Not for a second. I actually felt light. Like I'd just peeled off a heavy coat I didn't know I'd been wearing. And maybe part of me hoped he'd show up right then, soaked and scrambling. But he didn't. And that silence? That was the first real peace I'd had in years. He showed up the next evening, just as the sun was dipping below the trees, casting long shadows across the lawn, and across the bags that still sat untouched, right where I left them. I watched him from the kitchen, lights off, heart steady. He stood there for a moment, like he wasn't sure if he was at the right house. He tried the doorknob. It didn't budge. He knocked, softly at first, then louder. But I didn't move. Let him knock. Let him feel the distance he created with every careless choice. Then he noticed the envelope. I saw his face change, from confusion to disbelief to that wounded look men wear when they realize they're no longer in control of the narrative. He opened it right there on the porch. I imagined him reading every line, watching every second of the footage, feeling his little empire crack beneath him. He looked around, like he expected me to appear. Maybe to fight. Maybe to forgive. But I didn't give him either. I stayed behind the curtain, quiet, still, powerful. For years, I carried our life like a fragile vase, always careful not to drop it. He danced through it with muddy shoes. And now? Now he stood alone on the front step of a house that didn't belong to him anymore. And I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel pity. I felt ready. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the start of what I had planned next. I didn't scream on the porch, and I didn't text him afterward. Instead, I started with something quieter, something cleaner. I found the guest list. Not that it was official, of course, but thanks to social media and the security footage, it wasn't hard to identify the faces. I gathered names, matched them to profiles, found addresses. Some women were tagged in photos. Others had posted stories from my living room, drunk and glittery, dancing beside my wedding portrait. They didn't even blur my name in the background. I created packages, anonymous, brown envelopes, no return address. Inside each, screenshots, short video clips, carefully chosen stills from that night. And a note, not cruel, just honest. You were at this party. Did you know he was married? Most of them didn't. I wasn't surprised. Mark always had a way of making himself seem like a victim, the hard-working husband with the cold, absent wife. She's married to her job, I heard him say in one of the clips. Forgot how to be a wife a long time ago. That line became my favorite, because one of the women, the one in the red dress with the fake laugh, clearly hadn't known. And she was the one who posted the footage, not anonymously, not quietly. She blasted it online with a caption that read, "When you find out the guy you were flirting with all night has a wife, and she's a badass." It spread fast, faster than I expected. And I never said a word. I let it move on its own, like wildfire. At first, he tried to control the damage, took the video down from his own page, reported the posts, claimed it was taken out of context, but it was too late. People had already shared it, saved it, dissected it. It was in private group chats, work threads, even some meme pages. His voice, slurring that awful sentence, "She forgot how to be a wife," was now soundtrack to his downfall. And I didn't need to lift a finger. I just watched, quietly, while his carefully polished image unraveled. The fallout came swiftly. His boss called him in for a conversation. The company had a strict code of conduct, and even though the party was technically off the clock, the optics were bad, especially with the comments flooding in. Women calling him manipulative, men calling him careless. A few called him the guy from the video, like he was a punchline. I heard through a mutual friend that his promotion was quietly rescinded. No big announcement, just a quiet door closing behind him. As for his social circle, they scattered like roaches under kitchen lights. The ones who used to toast beers with him on weekends suddenly had plans. The men who cheered him on now avoided eye contact. And the women, well, they remembered the footage. They remembered the smirk, the lap, the arrogance. No one likes to realize they were just another prop in someone else's fantasy. And me? I stayed silent. I never gloated, never clapped back. I let the silence speak for me. People started whispering my name, not in pity, but with a kind of reverence. At my job, colleagues looked at me differently. Not like a victim, but like a woman who had drawn a line and dared someone to cross it. A few even pulled me aside, quietly admitting they had gone through something similar but never knew how to take their power back. That's the thing. When a woman doesn't scream, when she doesn't crumble, people don't know what to do with her strength. So they call it cold. I called it peace. I never replied to the DMs he sent once the backlash started. I saw the panic in them, the rapid shift from defensive to desperate. "You're really going to ruin me over one stupid night?" he wrote once. And I laughed. Ruin him? No, He did that all by himself. I just handed him the mirror. And in the reflection, there wasn't a man. There was a boy who thought charm was currency and that silence meant submission. He had no idea that silence could roar louder than rage. And I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation. All I needed was that moment. Quiet, late at night, standing by my window, watching the world move on while his fell apart. That was enough. But even then, I knew I wasn't finished. There was still one chapter left to write. Not for him, not for revenge, but for me. For the version of myself I had nearly lost in loving the wrong person for too long. My new apartment wasn't big. It didn't need to be. It had white walls, high windows, and a quiet that wasn't heavy. It was healing. I filled it slowly, intentionally. A worn leather chair I found at a vintage shop. A small bookshelf with only the books I loved, not the ones I used to buy for display. A bottle of wine always chilled, just in case I wanted to toast to absolutely nothing. It wasn't about starting over. It was about starting true, with no audience, no performance, just me. I began to remember myself in pieces, in the silence of Sunday mornings, in the way I made my coffee, strong and black, just how I like it, no one else to adjust for. In the music I played while folding laundry, dancing barefoot in the kitchen without worrying if I looked silly. There was no grand epiphany, no dramatic moment of triumph, just small, ordinary moments that slowly whispered, "You're home now." And for the first time in years, I believed them. I started reconnecting with friends I had slowly drifted from, not because of fights, but because I had spent so long managing his moods, his chaos, his storms. I laughed more, I slept better. And I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, because the person who kept kicking it off was no longer part of my story. Healing didn't come in waves. It came in layers. Soft, steady, mine. And I didn't miss him. Not once. What I missed was the woman I used to be. And now, she was back. Then one evening, just as the city lights began to flicker on and the hum of the world slowed to a hush, my phone lit up. A number I hadn't blocked, not out of hesitation, but out of apathy. I didn't need to cut him off completely. He was already gone. The message was short. I was drunk. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a while, not because I was tempted, but because it was almost laughable how little had changed for him. No accountability, no real apology. Just a desperate, sloppy reach for the version of me who would have said, "Okay, let's talk." But that woman no longer lived here. She packed her bags the same night I did. So I blocked the number, not out of anger, not even out of satisfaction, just necessity. Like deleting a song you once loved, but now can't stand to hear. I wasn't angry. I was simply uninterested. His voice had become background noise I no longer had to tolerate. And that, more than anything, was the victory. Not the trash bags, not the legal papers, not the viral video. It was this: being unmoved, free. Calm in a way that no one could shake. The kind of calm that comes not from winning a battle, but from walking away from a war you never wanted in the first place. The kind of calm you sip like wine at the end of a long day. Grateful, not because it's perfect, but because it's finally yours. That night I opened a bottle of wine, the good one, the one I'd been saving without even knowing what for. I curled up by the window, glass in hand, city below me, soft music playing in the background. No tears, no heavy reflections, just a moment of stillness. And then I raised my glass, not to him, not to revenge, but to the decision that changed everything, coming home early. That one twist of fate, that single instinct to turn back. It didn't just end a party, it saved my life. I thought about how many times I'd ignored my gut, how often I'd smoothed over cracks with hope and silence. But not anymore. Now I listen. To the warning signs, to the quiet voice inside me, to the feeling that tells you something's not right. And I honor it. That's what this was really about. Not punishing him, not proving anything, but choosing myself, fully, finally, unapologetically. So, if you ask me if I regret it, the answer is no. I don't regret coming home early. I don't regret what I saw. I don't regret walking away without a word. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is show up at the exact moment she wasn't expected, and instead of falling apart, she begins again, stronger than ever.
I'm moving out tonight. I've met someone who truly appreciates me. My husband's words pierced through the joyful chatter at our daughter's baby shower. Silence fell over the room like a heavy curtain. From the corner, a young woman, maybe 30 years old, awkwardly raised her glass of mimosa and gave a small wave. Our friends and family sat frozen, their expressions ranging from shock to pity to secondhand embarrassment. My daughter, Jennifer, 7 months pregnant with our first grandchild, looked up from the tiny pair of booties she'd just unwrapped. Her face crumpled, and I instinctively placed my hand on her shoulder. "I'm happy you found your path," I said to my husband of 38 years, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. I squeezed Jennifer's shoulder gently, whispered, "I'll call you later," and walked out of the community center in Columbus, Ohio, with my head held high. The May sunshine felt warm against my face as I stepped outside, a stark contrast to the cold reality that had just unfolded. I am Teresa Callahan, 61 years old, a retired school librarian who just watched my marriage publicly implode. But I wasn't as devastated as everyone in that room might have assumed, because I'd known for months. I slid into my car, a sleek new Lexus that Gregory had complained was too extravagant for a retiree, and pulled out my phone. With trembling fingers, anger, not sadness, I sent a text message with a secure link and the simple words, "You might want to check this when you have a moment." As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in my rearview mirror to see Gregory bursting out of the building, his face flushed as he fumbled with his phone. I knew exactly what he was seeing. Documentation of every financial move I'd methodically made over the past 3 months. The vacation house in Sandusky now solely in my name. Our joint savings, carefully and legally redistributed. The retirement accounts, protected under a trust my lawyer had assured me was airtight. Years ago, this would have been unimaginable. I was the woman who had to ask permission to buy a new dress, who handed over my teacher's paycheck for better management, who believed my husband when he said that financial matters were too complicated for me to understand. But people can change. People can learn. People can prepare. My phone began to ring. Gregory's name flashed on the screen. I declined the call and turned onto the highway, heading toward the luxury apartment I'd secretly leased last month. I first noticed something was wrong last Christmas. We were hosting our traditional family dinner. Gregory, myself, Jennifer, and her husband Thomas, our son William, who had flown in from Portland, and a handful of close friends. I was in the kitchen preparing dessert when Gregory's phone, left carelessly on the counter, lit up with a message. "Missing you already. Last night was perfect." The sender's name was Angela B. I remember setting down the knife I was using to slice apple pie, wiping my hands on my apron, and taking a deep breath. After 37 years of marriage, you develop an intuition. This wasn't a colleague. This wasn't innocent. This was something else entirely. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I began to pay attention. Gregory, once predictable in his routines, had become erratic. Monthly fishing trips extended to every weekend. Late nights at the office became more frequent, despite his supposed preparation for retirement from the investment firm where he'd worked for 3 decades. Credit card statements showed dinner charges at restaurants too fancy for business meetings, always for exactly 2 people. "You seem distracted lately," he said to me one evening in February, not looking up from his newspaper. "Is everything all right?" I almost laughed at the irony. "Just thinking about our future," I replied honestly. Gregory nodded absently. "Don't worry about that. I've got everything under control." That was his favorite phrase. "I've got everything under control." He'd said it when we bought our first home, when we invested in his company's stock options, when we made decisions about our children's education. For decades, I believed him. I trusted him to handle our finances because he was the expert, the successful investment advisor who managed millions for clients. What did I know about money? I was just a school librarian who loved books and children, but watching him pretend to read that newspaper while his mind was clearly elsewhere, I realized something important. Gregory might be having an affair, but his real betrayal had been keeping me financially ignorant for decades. That was a power imbalance I could no longer accept. The very next day, I made an appointment with Valerie Peterson, a financial advisor recommended by my friend Dorothy, who had navigated her own difficult divorce years earlier. Valerie listened carefully as I explained my suspicions and my situation. "You've been married how long?" she asked, reviewing the paperwork I'd brought. 38 years in June. "And in all that time, you've never had your own accounts?" I shook my head, feeling a flush of embarrassment. Gregory always said it was more efficient to manage everything together. "Mrs. Callahan, you need a crash course in taking control of your financial life," Valerie had said, pushing her glasses up on her nose. "And you need to move quickly, but carefully." The next month was a blur of appointments, paperwork, and secret financial maneuvers. I met with a lawyer, Elizabeth Winters, who specialized in high-asset divorces. I gathered documents, made copies, and cataloged every asset we owned. I learned that Ohio is an equitable distribution state, meaning that in a divorce, marital property would be divided fairly, though not necessarily equally. "You've contributed to this marriage for nearly 4 decades, Elizabeth explained. "As a teacher, you helped put food on the table while raising your children. You have every right to an equal share." What shocked me was discovering exactly what that share encompassed. Gregory had accumulated significantly more wealth than I'd realized. Beyond our primary residence and vacation home, there were investment properties I hadn't known about, stock portfolios, and retirement accounts with balances that made my eyes widen. "He kept all this from me?" I asked, stunned as I looked at the statement totals. "Financial concealment is unfortunately common," Elizabeth said gently. "But knowledge is power, and now you have both." Armed with this new understanding, I followed my legal team's advice meticulously. I opened my own bank accounts. I began transferring funds from our joint accounts, not all at once, which could look vindictive, but gradually and strategically. I updated beneficiary designations on insurance policies. I secured copies of tax returns, investment statements, and property deeds. And most satisfyingly, I transferred our vacation property in Sandusky, a lakefront cottage that had been my dream home for retirement, into my name alone, a move that was perfectly legal given how the property had been titled. Throughout this process, I maintained a facade of normalcy at home. I prepared Gregory's favorite meals, listened to his stories about work, and nodded sympathetically when he complained about being too busy for our usual Sunday dinners with the kids. I even feigned disappointment when he announced another weekend fishing trip, this time with my full knowledge that fishing meant a boutique hotel in Cincinnati with Angela B. Meanwhile, Jennifer's pregnancy progressed, and she asked if I would help host her baby shower. I threw myself into the planning, grateful for the distraction. We chose a spring garden theme, coordinated games and decorations, and sent invitations to family and friends. Gregory seemed pleased that I was occupied, making it easier for him to slip away unnoticed. What I didn't anticipate was that he would choose our daughter's celebration as the backdrop for his announcement. Even after months of suspicion and preparation, that level of callousness caught me off guard. But in a way, it made what came next so much easier. My new apartment was minimalist and modern, nothing like the traditional colonial home Gregory and I had shared for 26 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the Columbus skyline. The furniture was sleek and contemporary, and there wasn't a single floral print or antique in sight. This place represented the new Teresa, someone I was still getting to know. I silenced my phone after Gregory's 7th call and poured myself a glass of the expensive Cabernet I'd purchased with my new credit card. As I sipped, I savored not just the wine, but the silence, and the knowledge that I had finally taken control. The next morning, reality set in. Jennifer called, her voice thick with tears. "Mom, what's happening? Dad came back to the shower after you left, but he wouldn't explain anything. Everyone was asking questions. It was humiliating." "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I said. "This isn't how I wanted things to go. Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" "We're fine," she said. "But Mom, Dad says you've taken everything. He says you've been planning this, that you emptied accounts without telling him. Is that true?" I closed my eyes, feeling a pang of guilt. Not for what I'd done, but for how it affected our children. "Jennifer, your father and I need to work through some things. I've protected what's rightfully mine after 38 years of marriage. That's all you need to know right now." "But the baby shower. Why didn't you tell me something was wrong?" "Because it wasn't about me. It was about you and my grandchild. I never imagined your father would choose that moment to announce his decision." After promising to visit her later that week, I hung up and steeled myself for the next call. It came from William, our son. "Mom, what the hell is going on? Dad's completely losing it. He showed up at my hotel room at midnight, ranting about how you've stolen his retirement." "William, please watch your language," I said automatically, the school librarian in me emerging despite everything. "Your father is upset because he's facing consequences he didn't anticipate." "What consequences?" "Mom, he said you transferred the lake house to yourself. That's cold." I felt a flash of anger. Cold? What would you call announcing to our entire social circle that you're leaving your wife for another woman during your pregnant daughter's baby shower? There was a long pause. "Wait, what? Dad didn't tell me that part." Of course he hadn't. Gregory had always been selective with information, a trait I was now employing myself. I spent the rest of the day fielding calls and texts from concerned friends and family. Some were appalled by Gregory's behavior. Others were shocked by my financial maneuvers. Dorothy, my closest friend since our teaching days, came over with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of champagne. "To your liberation," she toasted, raising her glass. "I've been waiting 30 years for you to stand up to that pompous ass." I laughed despite myself. "Have you really disliked him all this time?" Dorothy's expression softened. "I never disliked Gregory. I disliked how he diminished you. How he made every decision, controlled every dollar, took credit for your successes, and blamed you for his failures. You deserve better, Teresa." As we ate lo mein straight from the containers, I filled Dorothy in on my plans. I would be meeting with my lawyer again tomorrow. Gregory had already contacted his own attorney. The battle lines were being drawn. "Are you scared?" Dorothy asked as she was leaving. I considered the question. Not scared. Sad, yes. Angry, definitely. But for the first time in decades, I feel powerful. That night I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I arrived at Elizabeth's office downtown to find her waiting with a grave expression. "Gregory's attorney has been in touch," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "They're contesting the property transfer and claiming you acted in bad faith." "Is that going to be a problem?" I asked, my confidence faltering slightly. It complicates things, but we've done nothing illegal. Everything was properly documented and filed. The lake house was transferred through legitimate channels. She pulled out a folder. However, they're demanding an emergency hearing for temporary financial orders. Gregory is claiming financial hardship. I nearly choked. Financial hardship? The man makes over $300,000 a year. Yes, but according to his filing, he has significant debt obligations I don't think you were aware of. Elizabeth spread several documents across her desk. Credit card statements showing balances in the tens of thousands. A personal loan with a staggering interest rate. A second mortgage on our primary residence that I had never signed for. How is this possible? I whispered, my hands shaking as I examined the evidence of yet another betrayal. There's more, Elizabeth said gently. The girlfriend, Angela Blackwood, she's a former client of Gregory's firm. There's been an ethics investigation ongoing for nearly 6 months. The pieces suddenly fell into place. Gregory's increasingly erratic behavior, his insistence that retirement was still years away, despite our original plan to retire together when I did, the frequent arguments about money that seemed to come out of nowhere. He's been hiding financial problems, I realized aloud. All this time, while making me believe he was the expert. It appears so, Elizabeth confirmed. And there's something else you should know. The firm is considering termination due to the inappropriate relationship with a client. If they find evidence he mismanaged her finances, he could lose his license, I finished. For a moment, I felt a wave of vindication, quickly followed by a cold realization. If Gregory lost his income and professional standing, it could impact the settlement I would receive in the divorce. What does this mean for me? I asked. It means we need to adjust our strategy, Elizabeth said. The good news is that you've already secured significant assets. The bad news is that there may be less to divide than we initially thought. As I left Elizabeth's office, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street, Gregory's black BMW. He stepped out as I approached my vehicle. Teresa, he called, his voice carrying across the parking lot. We need to talk. I hesitated, then turned to face him. He looked terrible. Unshaven, eyes bloodshot, wearing the same clothes from the baby shower. About what, Gregory? Your girlfriend? Your secret debt? The ethics investigation at your firm? His face paled. How did you... I know everything now, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. All the things you kept from me because finances were too complicated for my understanding. You don't understand, he insisted, stepping closer. Angela isn't what you think. This whole situation isn't what you think. Then explain it to me, I challenged. Explain why you humiliated our daughter at her baby shower. Explain why you took out a second mortgage without my knowledge. Explain why you've been lying to me for months. Maybe years. Instead of answering, Gregory's expression hardened. You'll regret what you've done, Teresa. I built everything we have. Everything. You wouldn't even know how to manage these assets without me. I smiled, a genuine smile that seemed to unnerve him. That's where you're wrong. I've learned quite a lot recently. I suggest you talk to your lawyer about a settlement because, from where I'm standing, I'm holding all the cards. 3 days after my confrontation with Gregory in the parking lot, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. The concierge called to announce that an Angela Blackwood was requesting to see me. I considered refusing, but curiosity won out. Send her up, I told him. Minutes later, I was face to face with the woman who had waved so awkwardly at our daughter's baby shower. She was younger than me, probably in her early 30s, but not the 20-something trophy I had imagined. She wore a conservative pantsuit and minimal makeup, looking more like a business professional than a homewrecker. Mrs. Callahan, she began, her voice tight. Thank you for seeing me. I assume you have something important to say, I replied, not inviting her to sit. Angela took a deep breath. I need to tell you something about Gregory. Something you deserve to know. Against my better judgment, I gestured to the couch. She perched on the edge, clutching her handbag like a shield. I'm not having an affair with your husband, she stated flatly. I never was. I laughed, a sharp sound without humor. You'll forgive me if I don't believe you. You were at my daughter's baby shower, waving when my husband announced he was leaving me for someone who truly appreciates him. I was there because Gregory insisted, she said. He told me it was a business brunch. I had no idea it was a family event until I arrived, and by then it was too awkward to leave. Something in her expression made me pause. Then why the announcement? Why the wave? Angela's eyes filled with tears. Because Gregory has been manipulating both of us. I'm not his girlfriend. I'm his victim. For the next hour, Angela told me a story that shook the foundations of everything I thought I knew. She had been Gregory's client at the investment firm, a young widow who inherited a substantial sum after her husband's death. Gregory had been assigned to manage her portfolio, but over time, he began making unauthorized investments, taking excessive fees, and eventually, diverting funds to cover his own mounting debts. When I discovered what he'd done, I threatened to report him, Angela explained. That's when the manipulation started. He convinced me that no one would believe me, that he could make it look like I had authorized everything. He said he had connections that could ruin me professionally. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, still skeptical but increasingly disturbed. Because yesterday, I finally went to the firm's ethics board with proof of what he did. They've launched a formal investigation. Gregory called me last night, threatening me again, and mentioned that you had stolen his money. That's when I realized you might be in danger too. She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. This contains copies of all the documentation, altered statements, forged authorizations, everything. I thought you should have it for your divorce proceedings. After Angela left, I sat stunned in my living room, the flash drive heavy in my palm. I didn't know whether to believe her story, but I knew someone who could help me verify it. I called Valerie, my financial advisor, and arranged to meet her immediately. After reviewing the documents on the drive, she confirmed what Angela had told me. This is serious, Teresa, Valerie said grimly. These aren't just ethical violations, they're potentially criminal. I felt sick. The man I had married, the father of my children, hadn't just betrayed me with another woman. He had committed fraud and potentially ruined lives. And now I had evidence that could send him to prison. That night, as I stared at the city lights from my window, I faced the most difficult decision of my life. What would I do with this information? The following week unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Gregory's firm placed him on administrative leave pending their investigation. Our divorce proceedings were temporarily stalled as both legal teams processed the new information. Jennifer was hospitalized briefly with stress-induced high blood pressure, putting her at risk for complications with the pregnancy. William flew back to Columbus from Portland, determined to fix things between his parents before the baby arrived. Through it all, I maintained a determined calm, even as I grappled with what to do about Angela's evidence. You have a powerful bargaining chip, Elizabeth advised during our latest meeting. We could use this to negotiate a very favorable settlement. Or I could turn everything over to the authorities, I countered. Let Gregory face the legal consequences of his actions. Elizabeth's expression was neutral. That's certainly an option, but consider how a public scandal and potential criminal case would affect your children, your grandchild, and ultimately, your own financial security. I knew she was right. If Gregory went to prison, there would be no alimony, potentially reduced assets to divide, and a stigma that would affect our entire family. Yet the thought of allowing him to escape accountability for his actions burned within me. The decision was made for me when Angela called again. I've been contacted by 2 more of Gregory's former clients, she said. They've noticed discrepancies in their accounts, too. The firm's internal investigation is expanding. My path became clear. I didn't need to be the one to bring Gregory down. His own actions were already doing that. What I needed was to protect myself, my children, and yes, even Angela and the other victims. I scheduled an emergency meeting with Elizabeth and came with specific demands for our counteroffer to Gregory's settlement proposal. Full ownership of both properties, 70% of all investment accounts, a lump sum alimony payment rather than monthly support, and most importantly, a complete separation from any liability related to Gregory's professional misconduct. He'll never agree to this, Elizabeth warned. He will, I said confidently, because I'm offering him something in return, my silence. The settlement meeting was held in a conference room at Elizabeth's law firm. Gregory arrived with his attorney, a sharp-suited man with an aggressive reputation. I was surprised to see how much Gregory had aged in just 2 weeks. Deep lines etched his face, and his hair seemed grayer. Mrs. Callahan has reviewed your proposal and has a counteroffer, Elizabeth began, sliding folders across the table. Gregory's attorney skimmed the documents, his eyebrows rising. This is completely unreasonable, he declared. Is it? I asked, speaking directly to Gregory. Considering what I know about your professional situation, I think it's quite generous. Gregory's face drained of color. What are you talking about? Angela Blackwood came to see me, I said quietly. She shared some very interesting documentation about your investment practices. You're bluffing, Gregory's attorney interjected. I turned to Elizabeth, who nodded and produced a thumb drive. This contains copies of everything we have, she said. We haven't shared this information with authorities yet, but rest assured, we will if necessary. Gregory and his attorney stepped outside to confer. I could see them through the glass wall of the conference room. Gregory gesticulating wildly, his attorney speaking in urgent, hushed tones. When they returned, Gregory's surrender was evident in his posture. We'll accept the terms, his attorney announced stiffly. With one modification, my client requests ongoing visitation rights with his future grandchild. I felt a twinge of unexpected emotion. Despite everything, Gregory was still a father and soon-to-be grandfather. That was something even I wouldn't take away from him. Agreed, I said, provided he completes an ethics course and financial counseling. Gregory looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Why would you stipulate that? Because our grandchild deserves a grandfather who understands right from wrong, I replied simply. Something you seem to have forgotten along the way. 2 hours later, with papers signed and notarized, my 38-year marriage was effectively over. The day Jennifer gave birth to Eliza Grace, Gregory and I sat on opposite sides of the hospital room. Our new reality crystallized in the awkward silence between us. But when our daughter placed that tiny bundle in my arms, nothing else mattered. I was a grandmother now, embarking on yet another new chapter in my life. In the months that followed, Gregory's professional world collapsed completely. The firm's investigation expanded to include regulatory authorities, and while he avoided criminal charges through a cooperation agreement, his career in financial services was permanently ended. He moved to a small apartment across town, started therapy, and began the humbling process of rebuilding his life from scratch. As for me, I sold our family home and moved permanently into my apartment. I traveled to places I'd always wanted to see. The Grand Canyon, New York City, even a 2-week tour of Italy. I volunteered at the library where I'd once worked, reading to children twice a week. And slowly, carefully, I began to repair the relationships damaged by Gregory's betrayal and my own necessary but painful response. You know, Dorothy said one evening as we shared dinner on my balcony, you've completely transformed this past year. You're not the same Teresa I've known for decades. I considered this as I looked out at the Columbus skyline, golden in the setting sun. I'm exactly the same person, I corrected gently. I just finally allowed her to emerge. Looking back on my journey from betrayal to empowerment, I realized the greatest revenge wasn't in the assets I secured or the dignity I maintained. It was in discovering I had been capable of rescuing myself all along.